The chill of the autumn afternoon seeped into my bones, a prelude to the cold dread settling in my heart. 72 years I'd walked this earth, seen joys and sorrows, weathered storms and celebrated sunrises, but nothing had prepared me for this. I sat on my battered Samsonite suitcase, the one Robert and I bought for our honeymoon, on the scrubbed, unforgiving porch of my son Michael's house. My home until a few hours ago. Now, just a doorway slammed shut. The scent of fallen leaves mingled with the faint, cloying sweetness of Sarah's expensive air freshener, a stark contrast to the bitterness rising in my throat. I traced the worn stitching on my tweed coat, a garment that had seen better days, much like myself. My glasses, perched precariously on my nose, framed a world suddenly devoid of familiar comfort. Michael's house, a modest two-story in a decent suburban neighborhood, now looked less like a haven and more like a fortress from which I had been cast out. "It's for the best, Mother," Sarah had declared, her voice as sharp and polished as her meticulously manicured nails. "Michael and we need our space. And frankly, with the business, well, extra mouths, you understand." Extra mouths. That phrase, thrown at me like a stale crust, twisted something vital inside me. I, Eleanor Vance, a woman who had taught literature for 40 years, who had nurtured a family, who had loved and lost, was now an extra mouth. Michael, my son, my only child, had stood beside her, a portrait of weak acquiescence. His eyes, usually so expressive, were fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, anywhere but on my face. He'd muttered something about economic realities, about just needing a little time to get back on our feet. Lies. All of it. Excuses. I remembered the day he was born, the tiny, perfect grip of his hand around my finger. I remembered reading him stories, teaching him to ride a bike, comforting him through scraped knees and broken hearts. I remembered the endless sacrifices, the late nights grading papers to afford his tuition, the years of quiet devotion. And now this. A cold dismissal, a calculated expulsion from the very life I had helped build. "I understand," I had said, my voice surprisingly steady, though each word felt like a shard of glass in my throat. "I understand perfectly." I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't pleaded. There was a dignity I refused to surrender, even as my world crumbled around me. A flicker of something, pity? Discomfort? Had crossed Michael's face, but it was quickly overshadowed by Sarah's triumphant smirk. Then, the door had closed. Not softly, not with regret, but with a definitive thud that echoed in the quiet street, a final punctuation mark to 35 years of motherhood. The sound vibrated through the wooden frame, through my own chest, settling into the hollow ache that had replaced my heart. The sun dipped lower, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. A car drove by, the driver giving me a quick, curious glance. I knew what they saw, an old woman, alone on a porch, a picture of pathetic abandonment. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Where was I to go? My savings were meager, stretched thin by Robert's last, ill-fated investment years ago, and then by medical bills and the rising cost of simply existing. I had nowhere. A tear, cold and unwelcome, tracked a path down my cheek, tasting of salt and dust. But it was not a tear of surrender. As I wiped it away, a different emotion, raw and unfamiliar, began to simmer beneath the surface of my despair. It was a spark, small but fiercely bright, an ember of defiance that refused to be extinguished. They thought I was old. They thought I was helpless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The streetlights flickered on, painting the familiar neighborhood in an eerie, unfamiliar glow. I pushed myself up, my knees creaking in protest, and hoisted the heavy suitcase. The world might have cast me out, but I, Eleanor Vance, was not yet broken. Not entirely. This was not an ending. This, I realized, was a beginning. A very, very cold and terrifying beginning. But I was still breathing. And as long as I was breathing, there was hope. And perhaps a different kind of justice. The suitcase was heavier than it looked, each step a testament to my physical and emotional burden. The autumn air grew sharper, biting at my exposed skin. I walked for what felt like miles, the familiar streets of Elmwood passing by in a blur of indifferent houses and closed curtains. My mind, usually a well-ordered library of literary knowledge and cherished memories, was a chaotic jumble of pain, anger, and a terrifying, bone-deep uncertainty. Where does a 72-year-old woman go when her only child closes the door on her? I had a few $100s in my purse, enough for a motel room for a night or two, maybe. But then what? The thought of a sterile, impersonal room filled me with a deeper chill than the evening air. My pride, though battered, recoiled from the idea of charity, of being a burden on anyone else. Yet, I had no choice. After a desperate call, my old friend Martha, bless her kind, perpetually harried soul, answered. Martha lived in a small, cluttered apartment above her antique shop, barely making ends meet herself. Her voice, thick with concern and thinly veiled shock, was a lifeline. Eleanor, honey. Of course. You come right over. Don't you worry about a thing. Her apartment was a testament to a life lived fully, but without much financial cushion. Every surface was adorned with knickknacks, forgotten treasures, and stacks of books. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and Martha's perpetually brewing chamomile tea. It was a chaotic embrace, and in that moment, it felt like the safest place in the world. For 3 days, I existed in a haze of Martha's comforting chatter and the unfamiliar rhythms of her small home. I pretended to read, but the words blurred. I feigned interest in her latest antique find, but my gaze kept drifting to the window, watching the world move on, seemingly oblivious to my fractured existence. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by images of Michael's averted gaze and Sarah's sneering triumph. On the 4th morning, unable to bear my own idleness, I decided to unpack the few things I had brought. My life, neatly condensed into one suitcase and a worn cardboard box. Inside the box, nestled among old photographs and a faded silk scarf, I found it, a silver filigree brooch, intricately carved with a small, stylized phoenix. Robert had given it to me on our 10th anniversary, a symbol, he'd said, of enduring love and rebirth. He had always been so poetic, even when his ventures were anything but. My fingers traced the cool metal, and a wave of nostalgia washed over me. Robert. My dear, complex Robert. He was a man of grand ideas, an eternal optimist, always chasing the next big dream. Some of those dreams had blossomed into small successes, others had withered, leaving us a little purr but never truly broken. His death, sudden and unexpected from a heart attack 10 years ago, had left a void that still ached. He would have never allowed this, I thought, a fresh surge of bitterness rising. He would have stood up for me. Beneath the brooch, folded neatly, was a yellowed envelope. It bore no stamp, no address, just my name scrawled across the front in Robert's familiar, looping hand. Puzzled, I opened it. Inside wasn't another love letter, but a short, cryptic note from a different handwriting, a formal, almost spineless script. Eleanor, it read, should anything ever happen to Robert, or should you find yourself in unexpected difficulty, please seek me out. Your husband made a particular investment, shall we say, which ensures your future is protected. I hold the relevant documents. Arthur Dawson, attorney at law. My breath hitched. Arthur Dawson. Robert's old college friend, a lawyer who had moved away years ago, a man I barely remembered. And an investment? Robert had never mentioned anything beyond the usual pension and our small savings. He'd always been a little secretive about his financial dealings, chalking it up to not wanting to worry my darling Eleanor with the boring details. But this sounded different. More significant. The words, ensures your future is protected, echoed in my mind, a faint, tantalizing whisper of hope in the suffocating silence of my despair. The brooch, the note. They were small, almost insignificant objects, yet they hummed with a quiet energy, a forgotten echo from a past I thought I knew completely. A spark ignited within me, not just of defiance, but of purpose. Robert, even in death, might just have thrown me a lifeline. And I, Eleanor Vance, was determined to grab it. The immediate, gnawing question of where I would lay my head tonight was momentarily replaced by a single, powerful resolve: find Arthur Dawson. Find out about this investment. The yellowed note clutched in my hand felt suddenly heavier than the suitcase I dragged across Elmwood. Arthur Dawson. The name was a faint whisper from a bygone era, a ghost of a memory. Robert had always been a man of connections, a networker before the term became fashionable, but Arthur was an anomaly, a friend from his more idealistic youth, before the cynicism of the world had set in. I remembered him as quiet, meticulous, a stark contrast to Robert's boisterous charm. Where would I even begin to look for someone after so many years? Martha, ever practical, suggested the library's local history and archive section. They keep all sorts of old records there, dear. Newspapers, city directories, even old business licenses. You never know. So, armed with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days, I found myself walking through the hushed halls of the Elmwood Public Library. The scent of old paper and polished wood was a comfort, a familiar embrace after the jarring rupture of my life. My destination was the small, glass-enclosed office of the head archivist, a woman named Mary Jenkins. Mary. The name clicked. She used to be Robert's secretary years ago, before he retired, and she took on this quieter role. Mary, now a woman in her late 60s with kind, tired eyes behind thick spectacles, looked up from her microfiche reader as I approached. Her face, initially blank, slowly registered recognition, then shock, and finally, a deep, sorrowful concern. Eleanor? My goodness. It's been ages. Is everything all right? Her gaze flickered to my still evident weariness. I offered a tight, brittle smile. As well as can be, Mary. I actually came because I need your help. A matter concerning Robert. Her eyes softened. Oh, Robert. A good man. Always had a twinkle in his eye. What can I do? I carefully explained about the note, omitting the circumstances of my eviction. I showed her Arthur Dawson's name. Mary frowned, a thoughtful line appearing between her brows. Arthur Dawson, yes. I remember him. Robert used to meet with him quite often, especially in those last few years. He was always very discreet about those meetings. She paused, her eyes drifting to a distant point, as if sifting through a mental Rolodex of memories. Robert was always full of grand schemes. But towards the end, he became quite private about one particular project, as he called it. More so than usual. Any idea what it was? I pressed, a tremor of anticipation running through me. Mary shook her head slowly. Not really. He'd just say, Eleanor wouldn't understand, or, it's a surprise for her future. He was quite insistent about that. Her gaze sharpened. Though I do recall one name cropping up a few times. A Mr. Sterling. Gerald Sterling. A developer. Not exactly the most reputable, if you catch my drift. Rumors always followed him about cutting corners, shady deals. A shiver went down my spine. Robert, associating with someone not exactly reputable? It didn't quite fit the image of the man I loved, yet it resonated with his adventurous, sometimes reckless, spirit. Do you remember anything else about the Sterling or the project? Mary tapped her chin. Yes, I remember seeing some building plans on Robert's desk once. Large, commercial-looking. And a newspaper clipping. It was about the old mercantile building downtown. They were talking about renovating it, but it was a bit of a local eyesore at the time. Robert had an unusual interest in it. He even visited it a few times, saying it had potential. The mercantile building. My heart gave a strange lurch. That was the building where Michael and Sarah had their apartment, on the 3rd floor, above a struggling bookstore and a small art gallery. It was an old, imposing structure, a relic from Elmwood's industrial past, recently bought and partially refurbished by a faceless corporation. I had visited Michael and Sarah there countless times, never once suspecting it could be connected to Robert. The mercantile building? I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Mary nodded. That's the one. I remember Robert saying something about a long-term investment in it, something about holding shares. But he never elaborated. She looked at me, her kind eyes full of unspoken questions. Eleanor, are you in some kind of trouble? I hesitated, then decided to tell her a part of the truth, enough to explain my urgency. Let's just say I'm trying to understand Robert's legacy and ensure my own future is indeed protected, as Arthur's note suggested. Mary nodded, a flicker of understanding in her gaze. Well, I can see what I can find about Arthur Dawson's whereabouts, and any old records pertaining to the Mercantile Building, and perhaps this Gerald Sterling. It might take a while, though. Our old files aren't exactly digitized. As I left the library, the autumn air felt different. Colder, yes, but also charged with a new energy. The initial shock of my abandonment had begun to crystallize into something harder, more resolute. Robert, in his typical enigmatic way, might have left me a key. A key not just to financial security, but perhaps to understanding the man he truly was, and in doing so, rediscovering the woman I was meant to be. The Mercantile Building, the place where my son and his wife had so cruelly cast me aside, now seemed to hum with a secret, a connection to a past that was rapidly becoming my present. The hunt was on. With Mary's promise of assistance echoing in my ears, I left the library with a renewed, albeit fragile, sense of purpose. The city, which had felt so alien just days ago, now presented itself as a puzzle to be solved, a labyrinth hiding answers. My years as a literature teacher had ingrained in me a methodical approach to complex texts, a habit of dissecting, analyzing, and looking for hidden meanings. Now, I would apply that same rigor to the chapters of my own unfolding drama. My first port of call was the old Elmwood County Records Office. A grim, utilitarian building filled with the faint, metallic scent of filing cabinets and the drone of fluorescent lights. I requested property records for the Mercantile Building, expecting a quick, straightforward answer. What I received, after an hour of waiting and several forms filled out with my shaking hand, was a stack of confusing, dense documents. Ownership was fragmented, held by various LLCs and trusts, a tangled web of corporate entities that meant nothing to me. Robert's name was nowhere to be found among the direct owners. It's common for large commercial properties, ma'am, a board clerk explained, barely glancing up from his computer. Lots of shell companies, makes it easier for investors. Frustration gnawed at me. Shell companies. The term itself sounded clandestine. Robert, my Robert, involved in such complexities? It painted a picture of a man I barely recognized, far removed from the charming dreamer who'd read me poetry under the stars. The image of the not reputable Gerald Sterling surfaced in my mind. Was this his doing? Was Robert, in his zeal for a grand plan, unwittingly entangled with someone dangerous? I spent the next 2 days tirelessly pursuing every faint lead. I visited the Elmwood Historical Society, hoping for old articles about the Mercantile Building's early investors or development plans, but found nothing pertinent to Robert's involvement. I even tried a few of the older, smaller real estate agencies, asking about Arthur Dawson or Gerald Sterling, only to be met with polite shrugs or blank stares. It seemed the past, much like my son, was determined to keep its secrets. Each dead end was a blow, a reminder of my vulnerability and the vastness of the task before me. The initial spark of hope threatened to flicker and die under the weight of bureaucratic indifference and forgotten histories. I felt like a detective in a noir film, except I was a 72-year-old widow in sensible shoes, not a trench-coated private eye. The thought was almost comically bleak. One afternoon, sitting in a quiet corner of the library, poring over dusty city directories from a decade ago, I found Arthur Dawson's name listed under Attorneys at Law, with an address that no longer existed. A building torn down years ago for a new supermarket. It was another dead end, but a small detail caught my eye, a tiny, almost invisible asterisk next to his listing, something I hadn't seen next to other names. It was a faint, almost meaningless mark. That evening, back in Martha's cluttered sanctuary, the silence felt heavy. Martha had gone to bed, leaving me with my thoughts and a half-empty cup of herbal tea. I held Robert's old note, the one from Arthur Dawson, scrutinizing every curve and line. The formal script, the precise penmanship. Then a thought struck me, an almost absurd leap of logic born of desperation. The brooch. The phoenix brooch. Robert had called it a symbol of rebirth. But what if it was more than that? What if it was a key, a symbol of recognition? I remembered Mary mentioning Robert's discretion, his secrecy. What if this investment was so sensitive, so potentially volatile, that he had built in a layer of protection, a way to verify identity? It was a wild theory, born more of literary analysis than financial acumen, but it clung to me with surprising tenacity. As I lay in bed that night, the unfamiliar mattress feeling lumpy beneath me, I realized something profound. My search for Arthur Dawson wasn't just about money or even about a place to live. It was about Robert. It was about understanding the choices he made, the secrets he kept, and perhaps, in doing so, understanding a part of myself that had long been dormant. The quiet, observant teacher was being forced to become something else entirely, a seeker of truth, a fighter for her own dignity. The journey was proving far more arduous than I'd imagined, but with each obstacle, a layer of my old self, the docile, obedient Eleanor, was slowly, painfully being shed. A new determination, cold and sharp, was beginning to take root. The image of Robert, vibrant and full of life, filled my mind as I tossed and turned on Martha's lumpy sofa. His laugh, a hearty, booming sound that could fill a room, the way he'd run his hand through his slightly thinning hair when he was deep in thought, the spark of mischief in his eyes when he was about to propose some audacious, yet often charming, plan. He was never one for quiet domesticity, not entirely. He was a force of nature, an adventurer at heart, trapped in the body of a small-town businessman. Our love story wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow burn, built on shared books, long walks, and a mutual appreciation for life's quiet wonders. Yet, beneath his poetic soul, there was always a restless energy, a craving for something more. He worked hard at his modest insurance agency, but his true passion lay in his projects, as he called them, speculative ventures that sometimes paid off handsomely and sometimes left us eating ramen for a month. I had always been the anchor, the grounded one, providing the stability that allowed his dreams to take flight, however briefly. I remembered his last few years particularly vividly. A subtle shift in his demeanor. He became more withdrawn, less inclined to share the details of his latest big idea. He spent longer hours in his study, the door often closed, the faint murmur of his voice on the phone reaching me through the heavy oak. When I asked, he would simply smile, a little too broadly, and say, "Don't you worry your pretty head, darling. It's all for our future." A big surprise. Everything's going to be just fine. Everything's going to be just fine. Those words, once a comforting refrain, now echoed with a haunting irony. Were they a genuine promise or a desperate attempt to reassure himself and me that he was in control? I recalled the faint scent of cigar smoke clinging to his clothes on those late nights, though he had quit smoking years before. And the dark circles under his eyes, dismissed as just a touch of insomnia. He'd grown particularly close to Arthur Dawson in those final years. Closer than I'd ever seen him with anyone outside our family. They'd meet for lunch, often for entire afternoons, and Robert would return with a new, almost frantic energy, a glint in his eye that was both exciting and a little unsettling. When Arthur suddenly moved away, or rather, simply vanished from the local scene without a trace, Robert had seemed deeply distressed. He never spoke about it, but a shadow fell over him, a quiet anxiety that he couldn't quite shake. The memory of Arthur's abrupt disappearance, coupled with Mary's vague warning about the not reputable Gerald Sterling, sent a fresh wave of unease through me. What kind of investment required such secrecy, such a peculiar note, and involved a lawyer who simply vanished? Robert had been many things, ambitious, a little reckless, sometimes naive in his optimism, but never, not once, dishonest. Or so I believed. The thought that he might have been involved in something truly illicit twisted my stomach. But then, I looked down at the phoenix brooch, glinting softly in the dim light of Martha's lamp. Robert had chosen it for its meaning, rebirth. It was a symbol of enduring hope, of rising from the ashes. He wouldn't have left me a path to ruin. He would have left me a path to protection. This note, this brooch, they were not just clues. They were his last act of love, a final, desperate attempt to shield me. The thought solidified my resolve. I wouldn't let his efforts be in vain. I wouldn't let Michael and Sarah's cruel dismissal define my ending. Robert, for all his secrecy, had been trying to secure my future. It was now my responsibility to uncover the truth, whatever it might be, and claim what was rightfully mine. The next morning, armed with a renewed sense of determination, I returned to the Elmwood Public Library. Mary had left a small note on the desk. "Eleanor, I found something. Not much, but it's a start. Check the old legal directories from 10 to 15 years ago. There's a tiny ad in one of them for a firm that Arthur Dawson briefly worked for before he disappeared. And a name, Mr. Henderson, the senior partner." The asterisk. It had to be connected. Robert, even in his most secretive moments, had left me breadcrumbs. And I, Eleanor Vance, the retired English teacher, was finally ready to follow them wherever they led. Even if it meant venturing into the darker, more unsettling corners of Robert's forgotten past. Mary's note was a tiny beacon in the labyrinth. The old legal directory was a dusty, leather-bound behemoth, its pages brittle with age. I found the advertisement, a small, almost apologetic notice for Henderson and Associates, legal counsel. And indeed, beneath the senior partner's name was Arthur Dawson of counsel, with a small, almost invisible asterisk. It was the same asterisk I'd seen before, a subtle signature in the grand design. The directory listed an old address for Henderson and Associates, now a laundromat. But a quick search on the library's online database revealed that Mr. Henderson, the senior partner, had retired years ago and was living a quiet, reclusive life in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of Elmwood. A number was listed, almost certainly a landline. My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. Or another dead end. I called, my hand trembling slightly as I punched the numbers. An old, raspy voice answered. "Henderson." I introduced myself, explaining my connection to Robert and Arthur Dawson, and cautiously mentioned the special investment. There was a long silence on the other end, heavy with suspicion. "I don't know anything about that, Mrs. Vance," he finally said, his voice flat. "Mr. Dawson handled his own clients. I had no involvement." He sounded weary, dismissive, ready to hang up. "Mr. Henderson," I pressed, my voice gaining a surprising firmness, "Robert always told me that if I ever needed to find someone connected to this, I should show them this." My free hand instinctively went to the phoenix brooch pinned to my coat. He said it was a symbol, a key. Another long pause. This one felt different. Less dismissive, more contemplative. "A phoenix, you say?" His voice was barely a whisper now. You have the brooch?" "Yes," I confirmed, my breath catching in my throat. "Come to my apartment tomorrow morning, Mrs. Vance. 10 o'clock. And bring the brooch." The line went dead. The next morning, the air was crisp, carrying the last vestiges of autumn. My outfit, carefully chosen, was a simple but respectable wool dress, hoping to convey a sense of quiet determination rather than desperation. The apartment building was nondescript, filled with the faint smell of old cooking and stale air. Mr. Henderson's apartment was cluttered, dusty, and smelled faintly of mothballs and stale pipe tobacco. He was a frail man, his skin papery and his eyes cloudy, but they held a shrewdness that belied his age. I showed him the brooch. He took it, turning it over in his trembling fingers, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "Robert," he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Always a romantic, even when he was being terribly pragmatic. He handed it back. "Arthur, God rest his soul, trusted very few people. Robert was one of them. And he knew Robert would do anything to protect you." He settled back into his worn armchair, the springs groaning in protest. "Robert came to Arthur years ago, terribly worried. He'd fallen in with Gerald Sterling, that snake, on a can't-miss real estate deal. The Mercantile Building. Robert had put a significant amount of capital into it, more than you probably knew." He paused, his gaze fixed on some point in the distance. Sterling, it turned out, was planning to cut Robert out, or at least severely diminish his stake. He was a master of legal loopholes, shell corporations, hidden clauses. My heart pounded. This was darker than I had imagined. But Robert, Henderson continued, he was smart. He saw the writing on the wall. He knew Sterling would try to take everything. He also knew his son, Michael, was, well, easily swayed. Naive. He didn't trust him to protect your future if something happened to him. Henderson looked directly at me, his eyes surprisingly sharp. So, Robert and Arthur devised a plan. A very intricate plan. He explained it slowly, carefully, watching my face for understanding. Robert, foreseeing the potential betrayal, had used a series of meticulously crafted, irrevocable trusts. He had quietly transferred his controlling share, a majority ownership in the mercantile building, directly into these trusts, with me, Eleanor Vance, as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork was complex, designed to be almost impenetrable, protecting the asset from Sterling's predatory tactics and from any future familial disputes. Arthur had been the trustee, the guardian of the secret. When Arthur disappeared, Henderson explained, he wasn't actually gone. He simply went to ground, as per Robert's instructions, in case Sterling or his associates came looking. He left all the original, legally binding documents with me. They've been in a safe deposit box, untouched, for years. Robert made sure you had the key, the brooch, to find me if you ever needed it. My mind reeled. The mercantile building. The building where Michael and Sarah lived. My home, now their home, from which I had been so cruelly evicted. It wasn't just a part of the building. It was the controlling share. I was the owner. I, Eleanor Vance, the extra mouth, was the legal, undisputed owner of the very ground beneath their feet. A gasp escaped my lips, a strangled sound of disbelief and dawning triumph. It wasn't just a lifeline, it was a hammer. A powerful, unyielding hammer that Robert, in his dying act, had placed in my hands. The years of quiet devotion, the unseen sacrifices, the unwavering belief in him, he had seen it all. He had repaid it, not with simple provision, but with an instrument of justice, precisely tailored for a situation he must have intuitively feared. The pain of betrayal, the humiliation, the gnawing despair, they began to recede, replaced by a cold, exhilarating surge of power. My hands, which had trembled with weakness, now felt steady, capable. Robert, my dear, flawed, brilliant Robert, had indeed ensured my future. But he had also given me the means to rewrite the past. Leaving Mr. Henderson's apartment, the world outside seemed to shimmer with a new, vibrant clarity. The autumn chill was still present, but I barely noticed it. My steps, once hesitant and weary, now had a determined rhythm. The papers clutched in my hand, copies of the trust documents, property deeds, and Arthur Dawson's meticulous notes, felt less like a burden and more like a shield, a sword. Mr. Henderson had recommended a colleague, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Ms. Evelyn Reed, known for her expertise in real estate law and her formidable reputation in Elmwood's legal circles. Her office was in a sleek, modern building downtown, a stark contrast to Henderson's dusty den. The scent of fresh coffee and the quiet hum of computers replaced the mustiness of old paper. Ms. Reed was a woman in her late 40s, with keen, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet efficiency. She listened intently as I recounted the improbable tale, from Michael and Sarah's cruel eviction to Mr. Henderson's revelations. I watched her face carefully, searching for any hint of disbelief, any sign that this was all a fantastical dream. But her expression remained impassive, professional. As she reviewed the stack of documents, her brow furrowed slightly. She flipped through pages, occasionally making a note or highlighting a passage. The silence in the office stretched, broken only by the rustle of paper and the soft click of her pen. Each second felt like an eternity, a test of the fragile hope that had taken root within me. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her voice calm and measured, "these are remarkable documents. Mr. Dawson was exceptionally thorough. And your husband, Robert, was clearly a very clever man." My breath hitched. "So, they're legitimate?" She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Completely. These trusts were drafted with an almost uncanny foresight. They are irrevocable, meaning they cannot be altered or dissolved without your express consent as the sole beneficiary. And the ownership of the majority stake in the mercantile building is unequivocally vested in you through these trusts. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It was real. All of it. The betrayal, the discovery, the truth of Robert's enduring protection. You are, in essence, Ms. Reed continued, the controlling owner of the entire mercantile building. You hold the power to dictate terms, to make management decisions, to set rental rates. More than that, you actually own the ground beneath their feet, so to speak. The irony was not lost on me. The extra mouth now owned the very roof over her son's head. A bitter, yet deeply satisfying, smile touched my lips. What are my options, Ms. Reed? She laid out the legal pathways with crisp clarity. First, we would need to formally notify the existing property management company, which, ironically, is likely unaware of this intricate trust structure, of your assumption of control. Then, we can proceed with all the rights and responsibilities of a majority owner. That includes renegotiating leases, making structural decisions, and, yes, adjusting rental fees. Her gaze met mine, a flicker of understanding in her professional demeanor. Given the circumstances you've described, Mrs. Vance, it seems you have a very strong position. A very strong position indeed. I want to exercise my rights, I stated, my voice firm, devoid of any wavering. I want to take control. And I want to ensure that Michael and Sarah understand the full implications of their actions. Ms. Reed nodded, a hint of steel in her own eyes. Understood. The process will involve some paperwork, some notifications, and potentially some resistance from the current management, who may try to obfuscate. But legally, Mrs. Vance, you are unassailable. We will begin the process immediately. As I signed the initial retainer agreement, the pen felt heavy, significant. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was a pact with myself, a declaration of independence. Robert, my quiet protector, had given me the means. Now, it was up to me to wield it. The feeling was intoxicating, a potent blend of justice and a burgeoning sense of power I hadn't known I possessed. The path ahead was clear, though I knew it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, resonant calm. The fear had receded, replaced by a focused resolve. The game, I realized, was just beginning. And this time, I was holding all the winning cards. The legal wheels began to turn with a deliberate, almost imperceptible hum. Ms. Reed, true to her word, initiated the process of formally notifying the property management, discreetly at first, to avoid any premature alarm. I spent the next few weeks in a state of carefully guarded anticipation, a quiet observer of the world, knowing that a seismic shift was imminent. Martha, still unaware of the full extent of my discovery, found my newfound energy puzzling but welcomed it. "You've got a sparkle in your eye, Eleanor," she'd say, "like you found a lost chapter to your favorite book." Indeed, I had. It was at the Elmwood Annual Autumn Gala, a charity event that every respectable resident of Elmwood attended, that my path inevitably crossed with Michael and Sarah. I had debated attending, fearing the sting of their inevitable disdain, but a sudden, defiant urge had propelled me to Martha's closet, where I found a dignified, albeit slightly dated, dark blue gown that still fit perfectly. With a borrowed pearl necklace and a fresh, resolute glint in my eye, I walked in, not as a victim, but as an unannounced guest at my own unfolding drama. They were there, of course, holding court near the main buffet table, Sarah's laughter tinkling a little too loudly, Michael hovering beside her, nodding obsequiously at her every pronouncement. Sarah was resplendent in a shimmering red dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, radiating an air of studied importance. When her gaze, sweeping across the room in a practiced survey of the social landscape, landed on me, her smile faltered, replaced by a momentary flash of annoyance, quickly masked. Michael, following her gaze, saw me. His face went through a rapid series of expressions, surprise, embarrassment, and a flicker of something that might have been guilt, quickly suppressed. He looked away, busying himself with a plate of canapés. Sarah, however, was not one to be ignored. With a tight, practiced smile, she made her way towards me, Michael reluctantly trailing in her wake. "Eleanor," she chirped, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that curdled my stomach. "What a surprise. We didn't expect to see you here." Her tone implied I was a stray cat that had wandered into a dog show. "And why ever not, Sarah?" I replied, my voice calm, even pleasant, a feat that surprised even myself. "I've attended this gala for 30 years. Some traditions, it seems, are harder to break than others." Michael finally managed to look at me, a strained smile on his face. "Mother, you look well." He seemed genuinely uncomfortable, avoiding my direct gaze. "I am well, Michael," I said, my eyes holding his for a moment longer than he seemed to tolerate. "Remarkably well, considering." Sarah, ever the opportunist, seized the moment to reassert her imagined superiority. "Yes, well, it's certainly been an adjustment for everyone. But you know, darling," she linked her arm possessively through Michael's, "sometimes these things are for the best. Allows everyone to find their own path. And really, with our new apartment at the Mercantile, we're finally getting the space we need for Michael's growing business. It's simply ideal. And affordable, too." She punctuated the last word with a dismissive little laugh, a pointed jab at my supposed destitution. I simply smiled, a genuine, slow smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The words "affordable" and "our new apartment at the Mercantile" hung in the air, imbued with a potent, unspoken irony. They had no idea. No inkling that the very ground they stood on, the ideal and affordable sanctuary they'd found, was already mine. "Indeed," I murmured, my gaze drifting past them, taking in the elegant ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the hum of polite conversation. Sometimes, what appears to be a setback turns out to be a remarkable stroke of fortune. One never truly knows what secrets a building holds or what unexpected turns life might take. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. My calm demeanor, my lack of expected despair, seemed to disorient her. Michael, however, merely looked relieved that the awkward encounter was drawing to a close. "Well, it was interesting to see you, Eleanor," Sarah said, pulling Michael slightly away. "Enjoy the evening." "Oh, I most certainly will, Sarah," I replied, my smile widening just a fraction. "Every single moment. And I dare say, you might find your own future quite interesting very soon." I watched them retreat, Sarah casting a confused glance over her shoulder, Michael still avoiding my eyes. A quiet, exhilarating thrill pulsed through me. They were dancing on the precipice of their own making, completely oblivious to the earthquake I was about to unleash. The cat and mouse game had begun, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the one holding the strings. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a delicious tension building in my chest. The polite smiles and false pleasantries of the gala were merely the prelude to a far more dramatic reveal. The days following the gala were a blur of calculated activity. Ms. Reed, with her quiet efficiency, was a force of nature. She meticulously navigated the labyrinthine corporate structures, unraveling the remaining threads of ownership in the Mercantile building. My existing majority stake, secured by Robert's foresight, gave us significant leverage. The scattered, smaller shareholders, mostly investment groups and distant heirs, were amenable to selling, unaware of the impending change in control. They simply saw it as a good return on a dormant asset. I watched the transactions unfold, a detached observer of my own financial ascension. The money for these acquisitions came from accounts Robert had also established, hidden deep within a complex web of investments that even I, his wife, had known little about. He truly had been a master of discreet financial maneuvering, a side of him I was only now fully appreciating. It was a strange sensation, signing documents that transferred millions of dollars, money I hadn't known existed, money that was now entirely mine. There were moments of profound reflection. Each signature, each wire transfer, was a step further away from the woman I had been, the woman who worried about grocery bills and retirement savings. Robert had laid the groundwork for this, not out of greed, but out of a profound desire to protect me. He had seen the world with a clarity I had not, anticipating the very scenario that had now unfolded. His secrets, once a source of mild exasperation, now felt like acts of profound, enduring love. I thought of the long hours he must have spent, hunched over ledgers, conferring with Arthur Dawson, meticulously crafting these trusts. He had risked a great deal, probably incurred the wrath of men like Gerald Sterling, all to ensure my security. The depth of his devotion, revealed posthumously, brought a fresh wave of grief, but also a quiet, fierce gratitude. The final acquisition was completed in a quiet closing session. The last remaining shares were mine. The mercantile building, that imposing brick structure that housed my son and his wife, was now entirely under my ownership. The deed, officially registered in the name of the trust one controlled, was a tangible symbol of my victory. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the legal jargon suddenly imbued with immense personal meaning. Ms. Reed sat across from me, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. "It's done, Mrs. Vance. As of this morning, you're the sole owner of the mercantile building. Uncontested. And completely within your rights." A sense of immense, almost overwhelming, power settled over me. It wasn't the kind of power that inflated one's ego, but rather a cold, clear recognition of control. Control over my own destiny and, inadvertently, over the destinies of those who had wronged me. There was no joy, no triumphant cackle, only a deep, abiding stillness. The thirst for raw, unbridled revenge was tempered by the gravity of the situation, by the years of shared history with Michael. But the need for justice, for a rebalancing of the scales, was absolute. "Thank you, Ms. Reed," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling within me. "What are the next steps regarding the current tenants?" She smiled faintly. "That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Vance. We can issue new lease agreements, effective immediately. And, of course, new rental terms." I nodded, the image of Sarah's sneering face at the gala flashing in my mind. "Yes, new rental terms. Significantly revised. And I want them delivered personally." "As you wish," Ms. Reed replied, her eyes acknowledging the unspoken implications. I left her office, the crisp autumn air now feeling like a bracing embrace. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the city streets. I walked towards the mercantile building, not as a former resident, not as a rejected mother, but as its proprietor. I looked up at the familiar facade, the windows of Michael and Sarah's apartment, oblivious and brightly lit. They were home, comfortable in their assumed security, living in a space they believed was theirs, protected by an affordable lease. They had no idea that their landlord had just changed, and that their comfortable illusion was about to shatter. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The days leading up to the confrontation were a strange blend of meticulous planning and quiet introspection. Ms. Reed, with my explicit instructions, drafted the new lease agreements. The rental increase was substantial, calculated not just for market value, but as a direct, undeniable message. 3 times their current rate. It was not merely punitive, it was designed to be unaffordable, to force a decision, to expose the fragility of their carefully constructed lives. I spent hours poring over the documents, double-checking every clause, every legal nuance. This wasn't just about money, it was about precision, about demonstrating that I, Eleanor Vance, was no longer a woman to be underestimated or dismissed. I wanted no room for argument, no loopholes for Michael or Sarah to exploit. My years of teaching literature had taught me the power of carefully chosen words, of irrefutable evidence. During this time, Martha continued to be my rock, though she remained blissfully ignorant of the true scope of my machinations. She'd bring me cups of tea, offer unsolicited advice on how to spruce up my resume for a part-time job, and lament the cruelty of some children. Her innocent kindness was a stark contrast to the cold, strategic focus that had taken hold of me. I found myself admiring her simple goodness, even as I prepared to execute a plan that was anything but simple or good in the traditional sense. In the quiet evenings, I would sit alone, the phoenix brooch still pinned to my coat, and look at an old photograph of Robert. His kind eyes, his mischievous smile. Would he approve? The question lingered, a faint echo of my former self. The man he had been, the man I loved, was honorable. But the man who had woven this intricate web of trusts, who had anticipated the very treachery I faced, was also a pragmatist, a protector. I believed he would have. He had built this, after all, as my safeguard, as my justice. My resolve hardened with each passing day. The initial surge of triumphant anger had mellowed into a colder, more enduring determination. This wasn't about petty spite. It was about reclaiming my dignity, asserting my worth, and delivering a harsh, undeniable lesson in consequence. They had judged me, cast me aside as a burden. Now, they would learn the true weight of that judgment. I envisioned the scene in my mind, replaying various scenarios. Sarah's inevitable fury, Michael's likely capitulation. I knew their weaknesses, their predictable reactions. I would not shout. I would not plead. I would simply present the facts, the irrefutable truth of their new reality. My voice, I decided, would be calm, even quiet, but imbued with the unyielding strength of steel. One afternoon, as Ms. Reed confirmed that all the legal notices were prepared and ready for delivery, I felt a strange sense of calm descend upon me. The storm of emotion that had raged within me for weeks had finally subsided, leaving behind a clear, unclouded purpose. The grief for my lost relationship with Michael, for the innocent family I thought we had, was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface. But it was overshadowed by the fierce satisfaction of agency, of taking back control. I looked out the window, watching the last golden leaves drift from the trees. Winter was approaching, a season of stark truths and unforgiving cold. It felt fitting. The easy, comfortable illusions of my past life and of Michael and Sarah's self-serving narrative were about to be stripped bare. The delivery was scheduled for the next morning. Ms. Reed would accompany me, a silent, legal witness to the unfolding drama. I picked out an outfit, a tailored gray suit, simple, elegant, and uncompromising. I would meet them not as their mother, not as an extra mouth, but as their landlord. As the true owner of their home, and of my own destiny. The final chess piece was in place. The game was about to reach its shattering climax. The morning arrived, crisp and bright, much like the clarity of my purpose. I stood before the mirror in Martha's small bathroom, meticulously adjusting the lapels of my tailored gray suit. The fabric felt cool and solid, a stark contrast to the threadbare comfort of my usual clothes. My silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, my glasses perched firmly on my nose. My reflection stared back, not the frail, abandoned old woman of weeks past, but a woman with a quiet, resolute strength etched into the lines around her eyes. Ms. Reed arrived precisely at 9, her briefcase clutched in one hand. She wore an expression of calm professionalism, a silent acknowledgement of the significant task ahead. Together, we drove to the Mercantile Building. Each familiar block, each turn, felt like a deliberate step towards an inevitable reckoning. We parked directly in front, a spot usually taken by Sarah's flashy SUV. The building loomed, solid and imposing, but no longer a symbol of my exclusion. It was, I realized with a profound sense of ownership, simply mine. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The same elevator I had ridden countless times, bringing holiday gifts, home-cooked meals, and a grandmother's love. Now I carried something far different. I knocked firmly on the door to Michael and Sarah's apartment. A moment later, Sarah's voice, sharp and irritated, called out, "Who is it?" "Eleanor Vance, Sarah. And my attorney, Ms. Reed. We need to speak with you and Michael." A beat of surprised silence. Then, the click of the lock, and the door opened a crack. Sarah's eyes, narrowed with suspicion, widened slightly when she saw Ms. Reed. Michael appeared behind her, looking rumpled, as if he'd just woken up. His initial expression of annoyance morphed into one of apprehension. "Eleanor? What is this? What's going on?" Michael stammered, his gaze darting between me and the unsmiling lawyer. "May we come in?" Ms. Reed asked, her voice polite but firm. Sarah hesitated, then, perhaps sensing the official nature of the visit, reluctantly stepped aside. We entered the apartment, the same apartment I had helped them decorate, the same walls that had witnessed my son's childhood. It felt colder now, less like a home, more like a stage. "What is this, Mother?" Michael asked again, a nervous edge to his voice. "Is everything all right? Are you moving back in?" The question was laced with thinly veiled horror. I met his gaze, my eyes unwavering. "No, Michael. I am not moving back in. I am here on official business." Ms. Reed stepped forward, her voice crisp and clear. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, my client, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, has acquired the full ownership of the mercantile building, effective immediately. As the new owner, she has directed me to present you with new lease agreements." Silence. A profound, stunned silence. Michael's jaw went slack. Sarah's meticulously made-up face drained of all color, leaving her looking pale and almost ghostly. She scoffed, a strangled, disbelieving sound. "What? That's impossible. The building is owned by a corporation." You're joking, Eleanor. This is some kind of sick prank." I stepped forward then, my voice quiet, but each word resonated with the weight of undisputed truth. "It is no prank, Sarah. The corporation you speak of was merely a facade. Robert, my late husband, your father, Michael, was the true owner of the controlling interest, held in a series of trusts for my protection. Trusts that are now fully under my control. And as of this morning, I own every single brick and beam of this building, including this apartment." Michael, finally finding his voice, sputtered, But Dad never said anything. This is crazy. You can't do this." "Your father," I replied, my gaze hardening, "was a prudent man who anticipated many things, including, it seems, the possibility that his only son and his wife might dismiss his widow as an extra mouth to feed." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, potent with their recalled cruelty. "You see, Michael, Sarah, this isn't just a building. This is my building. And now you will be operating under my terms." Ms. Reed then calmly placed the new lease agreements on their polished coffee table. "The new rental rate, effective immediately, is 3 times your previous rent, payable within 30 days. Should you choose not to accept these terms, you will be required to vacate the premises within 60 days. Sarah let out a shriek, a raw, uncontrolled sound of fury and disbelief. 3 times? You can't be serious. This is extortion. This is revenge." "It is justice, Sarah," I corrected, my voice still quiet, but colder than any winter wind. "It is the market rate for a prime apartment in a rapidly developing area. And it is the consequence of underestimating me. You thought I was old, frail, and disposable. You thought I had nowhere to go, no recourse. You were wrong. Robert ensured I had a recourse. He ensured I had a home. And now you are living in it." Michael stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and dawning realization. The full weight of his past actions, the callousness of his betrayal, seemed to crash down on him. He looked from Sarah's furious, desperate face to my own calm, unyielding expression. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. It was the sound of a world shattering, of an empire crumbling. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, resonant, and almost terrifying sense of peace. The strike had landed. The silence that followed Ms. Reed's pronouncement was not empty, it was heavy, vibrating with the raw shock radiating from Michael and Sarah. Sarah was the first to break it, her shriek morphing into a torrent of furious accusations. "You spiteful old woman. This is exactly what it is, isn't it? Pure, unadulterated spite. You just want to ruin us, because we wouldn't let you freeload off us." Her face was contorted, a mask of unbridled rage that distorted her usually perfect features. "Freeload?" I repeated, my voice still dangerously calm. "Is that what you call a mother who offered unwavering support, who sacrificed her own comfort for her son's upbringing? Is that what you call an extra mouth?" My gaze was fixed on Michael, who stood utterly speechless, pale and trembling. Sarah, impervious to subtlety, lunged forward, her finger jabbing towards me. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, you won't get away with this. We'll fight you. We'll tell everyone what kind of vindictive monster you really are. Michael, tell her. Tell her this is illegal. Michael finally stirred, a pathetic whimper escaping his lips. Mother, please, this is crazy. You can't just triple the rent. We have a business to run. My clients come here. Sarah, calm down. He turned to me, his voice taking on a pleading, desperate tone. Mother, please. We can talk about this. We can find a compromise. You wouldn't really do this to your own son, would you? His sudden shift from defensive anger to craven supplication sickened me. You had your chance to talk, Michael, I said, my voice cutting through his pleas like a knife. When I sat on your porch, abandoned. When you averted your eyes while your wife called me a burden. That was your chance for compromise. You chose then. Ms. Reed stepped in, her legal gravitas asserting itself. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, my client's actions are entirely within the bounds of the law. As the sole owner of this property, she has every right to set new rental terms, provided proper notice is given, which you have now received. Your lease was month to month, and any attempts to dispute this legally will be futile and costly. Sarah rounded on her, eyes blazing. You're just her hired gun. You're helping her destroy her own family. My role is to protect my client's interests and uphold the law, Ms. Reed responded, unflappable. And in this instance, the law is unequivocally on Mrs. Vance's side. I watched them, the pathetic spectacle of their unraveling. Their carefully constructed facade of prosperity and control was crumbling before my eyes. I knew about Michael's struggling construction business, the unpaid invoices, the creditors circling. I knew about Sarah's increasing debt from her lavish spending habits. Robert, in his discreet way, had kept tabs on everyone and everything. He'd foreseen their weaknesses, their dependency on this affordable apartment. I am aware of your financial situation, Michael, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. Your business is failing. Your credit is poor. Finding an alternative, comparable apartment in this market at a rate you can afford will be challenging, particularly within 60 days. That hit them harder than any legal pronouncement. Sarah gasped, her fury momentarily eclipsed by panic. How do you know that? Let's just say your father was a very thorough man, I replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. He had a way of knowing things. Suddenly, there was a tentative knock on the apartment door. Michael and Sarah froze. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Rodriguez, a sweet, elderly woman from the apartment next door, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. Behind her, I could see Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker who lived down the hall, peeking out. The walls in these older buildings were thin, and Sarah's earlier shriek had clearly carried. Is everything all right, dear? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her eyes darting between Sarah's tear-streaked face and my calm, authoritative presence. We heard some shouting. Sarah, caught completely off guard, looked mortified. Michael stammered, No, Mrs. Rodriguez, everything's fine, just a family discussion. I stepped forward, meeting Mrs. Rodriguez's gaze. Everything is indeed fine, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm Eleanor Vance. And I'm the new owner of this building. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Mr. Henderson's jaw dropped. The whispers began immediately, spreading through the hallway like wildfire. The Vances, who had always exuded an air of slightly superior comfort, were suddenly exposed. The scorn they had shown me, the dismissive attitude they'd harbored towards their neighbors, was now reflected back at them, multiplied. Sarah grabbed Michael's arm, pulling him back into the apartment. Get out. Get out, both of you, she shrieked, slamming the door shut. The sound was not definitive this time, but rattled, a desperate attempt to regain control. Ms. Reed calmly handed me the extra copies of the lease. Our work here is done, Mrs. Vance. The notices have been served. They will have to make a choice. As we walked away, the murmurs from the neighbors followed us. I could hear their hushed tones, the incredulity, the dawning understanding. Michael and Sarah's carefully constructed world had just been shattered, not by a single blow, but by a relentless, systemic dismantling of their perceived security. And in the wreckage, I felt a strange, complex mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Justice had been delivered, cold and unyielding. But the cost, I knew, was irreversible. My son was gone, perhaps forever, consumed by the very greed and disdain he had embraced. The weeks that followed were a testament to the inexorable march of consequence. The Elmwood gossip mill, fueled by Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Henderson's eyewitness accounts, churned with relish. The story of Eleanor Vance, the elderly mother evicted by her son, who then bought the very building he lived in and tripled his rent, spread through the town like wildfire. It was a scandal, a cautionary tale, and a source of perverse amusement for many. I remained in Martha's apartment, a quiet observer of the unfolding drama. I didn't actively seek information, but the news found its way to me through Martha, who, though still unaware of my exact role as the new landlord, heard everything from her antique shop customers. Michael and Sarah's world, once seemingly impregnable, began to fray at the edges. They tried desperately to find new housing. Martha relayed stories of Sarah's frantic calls to real estate agents, her increasingly shrill voice echoing through the phone lines of local businesses. No one seemed willing to rent to them at a rate they could afford, not with their credit history and Michael's faltering business. The affordable apartment they had boasted about was now a prison, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Their relationship, already strained by ambition and resentment, buckled under the pressure. I imagined the arguments, the recriminations, the blame shifting back and forth between them. I remembered the subtle cracks I had noticed for years. Sarah's barely concealed contempt for Michael's lack of ambition, Michael's quiet resentment of Sarah's constant demands. The shared adversity, instead of uniting them, seemed to tear them further apart. One afternoon, Martha came back from the shop, her face a mix of pity and exasperation. Poor Mrs. Vance from number 3B said she saw movers today at Michael and Sarah's, she announced, oblivious to the sting her words carried for me. All their furniture. And then later, a big argument in the hallway. Sarah was screaming about Michael being a spineless loser and how he couldn't even keep a roof over their heads. Apparently, she packed her bags and left. A hollow ache spread through my chest. Sarah was gone. The architect of my immediate misery, the catalyst for this entire, painful saga, had abandoned her husband. I felt no triumph, no surge of vindictive glee. Only a profound, unsettling emptiness. The satisfaction of seeing her suffer was diluted by the stark reality of Michael's utter isolation. He lasted another week in the apartment, amidst the echoes of departed furniture and a growing pile of eviction notices. I received reports from Ms. Reed that he had tried to contact me, leaving increasingly desperate messages with her office. He wanted to negotiate, to apologize, to make things right. I never answered. There was nothing left to negotiate. Nothing left to make right. The words he should have spoken on his porch, the remorse he should have shown, were too little, too late. Then, one cold, gray morning, I saw his car pull away from the Mercantile building. It was packed to the brim, an old U-Haul trailer hitched behind it, swaying precariously. He was alone. His face, visible through the window, was drawn and defeated, a shadow of the boy I had raised, a stranger to the man he had become. He looked back at the building once, a long, lingering gaze filled with something akin to despair, before driving off and disappearing around the corner. My son was gone. My only child, the boy I had loved with every fiber of my being, had vanished from my life, not with a flourish of defiance, but with the quiet, ignominious whimper of a defeated man. He was no longer just evicted from an apartment. He was evicted from my heart, from the remnants of our fractured family. I sat by Martha's window, watching the empty street, the absence of Michael's car a stark punctuation mark on a chapter that was irrevocably closed. There was a quiet satisfaction, yes, in the realization that I had reclaimed what was mine, that justice had been served. But it was a satisfaction tinged with an immeasurable sorrow. The hurricane had passed, leaving behind not a clear, vibrant landscape, but shattered fragments, the irreparable shards of a family I had once cherished. The sense of triumph was intertwined with a profound loneliness, a heavy understanding that some victories come at an unbearable cost. The days after Michael's departure were filled with a strange, almost surreal quiet. The constant undercurrent of dread and anticipation that had fueled me for weeks finally dissipated, leaving behind a vast, echoing space. Martha, noticing my newfound stillness, offered a comforting hand and a knowing look. "Some silences are heavier than words, dear," she murmured, still unaware of the full magnitude of my recent endeavors. But the quiet was not to last. The mercantile building, now unequivocally mine, demanded my attention. Ms. Reed, ever the professional, had arranged for a temporary management company to oversee the transition, but I knew I couldn't simply delegate. This wasn't just an investment, it was a testament to Robert's foresight and my own resilience. It needed my personal touch, my careful consideration. My first official act as the new owner was to meet with the remaining tenants. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Henderson, the young couple who ran the struggling bookstore on the ground floor, and the owner of the small art gallery. They all gathered in the communal lounge, a space I remembered as often empty and neglected. They looked at me with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and a touch of apprehension, clearly aware of the dramatic circumstances that had led to my proprietorship. I stood before them, not as the vengeful mother, but as a calm, assured businesswoman. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am the new owner of the mercantile building." I then proceeded to outline my vision. "I understand there have been changes, but I want to assure you all that I intend to manage this building with fairness, transparency, and a genuine commitment to creating a vibrant, supportive community." I explained my plans for overdue maintenance, for fair and stable rental increases, nothing like the punitive sum I had levied on Michael and Sarah, and for actively seeking new, complementary businesses for the vacant storefronts. I spoke of Robert's original vision for the building, his belief in its potential as a cornerstone of Elmwood's downtown. The tension in the room visibly eased. Mrs. Rodriguez offered a relieved smile, Mr. Henderson nodded approvingly, and the bookstore owner, a young woman named Clara, even asked a hesitant question about a leaky pipe. I answered each query with a directness and understanding that surprised even myself. It felt right. This was not about personal vendetta anymore. This was about stewardship, about nurturing something that Robert had built and that I was now responsible for. Over the next few months, the mercantile building slowly transformed. I hired local contractors for much-needed repairs and renovations, boosting the local economy. I held regular tenant meetings, listening to their concerns and ideas. I found myself engaging with people in a way I hadn't done since my teaching days, drawing on my skills of empathy, organization, and problem-solving. I walked the halls daily, the keys to every door jingling softly in my hand. The weight of them was no longer a symbol of burden, but of empowerment. I would stop by the bookstore, chat with Clara about her inventory. I'd visit the art gallery, admiring the local talent. I even helped Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries up the stairs one afternoon. These small interactions, this sense of belonging and contribution, slowly began to mend the fractured pieces of my soul. The apartment where Michael and Sarah had lived remained empty for a while. It was a large, desirable unit, and I received several applications. But I was in no hurry. I sometimes stood in the empty space, feeling the echoes of their presence, the ghosts of our past. There was a faint scent of Sarah's perfume, a lingering shadow of Michael's indifference. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a profound sense of closure. Their chapter in this building and in my life was irrevocably finished. I realized then that my quiet life, before Michael's betrayal, had indeed been a mask. Beneath the surface of the gentle, retired teacher, there had always been a stronger, more resilient woman, forged by Robert's unconventional spirit and my own unwavering commitment. The trauma of my eviction, the journey of discovery, and the painful act of justice had stripped away that mask, revealing a core of steel I never knew I possessed. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, Robert's widow, Michael's mother. I was Eleanor Vance, the owner, the manager, the protector of the mercantile building. And in this new role, I found a purpose, a strength, and a quiet dignity that was entirely my own. The first frost of winter had finally arrived, painting the branches outside Martha's window with a delicate, ephemeral lace. 6 months had passed since Michael drove away, since Sarah vanished, since I had declared myself the new hostess of the mercantile building. The initial whirlwind of managing the property had settled into a steady, fulfilling rhythm. I had moved into a smaller, cozier apartment on the second floor of the mercantile, a space I carefully curated to reflect my new life, a blend of Robert's adventurous spirit and my own rediscovered strength. One evening, I hosted a small gathering in my new, sun-drenched living room. Martha was there, her eyes shining with pride for my transformation, though she still only knew the broad strokes of my journey. Miss Reed, my unflappable attorney, raised a glass of Chardonnay, her gaze acknowledging the full circle of events. Mr. Henderson, whose initial clue had set me on this path, shared stories of Robert's younger, more daring escapades. Even Clara from the bookstore and Mrs. Rodriguez joined, their presence a testament to the community I was helping to foster. As the conversation flowed, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The pain of Michael's betrayal, the cold shame of his eviction, still resonated within me, a phantom limb ache that might never fully disappear. But the raw, consuming anger had faded, replaced by a profound sense of understanding. It was not forgiveness, not in the traditional sense of absolving their actions, but an acceptance. I understood that their choices, their greed, their smallness, were their own burdens to bear, not mine. I had delivered justice, swift and uncompromising, not out of malice, but out of necessity. It's funny, I mused aloud, looking out at the glittering lights of Elmwood, how life throws you curveballs. You think you know your path, your purpose. Then, suddenly, everything changes. And you discover reserves of strength you never knew you had. Martha squeezed my hand. You've always been strong, Eleanor. You just had to be reminded. Ms. Reed added, sometimes, Mrs. Vance, the greatest strength is found in standing up for yourself, even when it feels like the world is against you. I thought of Robert, his enigmatic smile in the old photograph on my mantelpiece. He had, in his own way, forced me to confront my own power. He had not just left me money, he had left me an education, a final, most important lesson. He taught me that protection sometimes comes in the form of a meticulously planned defense, and that love can manifest as an intricate web of trusts designed to shield those you cherish. My arc was complete. I had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, a phoenix in my own right, reborn not into bitter isolation, but into a life of purpose, community, and quiet authority. I continued to manage the mercantile building, finding deep satisfaction in its revitalization, in the thriving businesses and contented tenants. I even started a small initiative to mentor other elderly women in the community, helping them navigate financial complexities and assert their independence. There would be no grand reunion with Michael, no tearful reconciliation. That bridge had been burned beyond repair. The happy ending I once envisioned, a lifetime surrounded by my son and grandchildren, was not to be. But this new reality, forged in the crucible of loss and resilience, was a different kind of happy. It was a wiser, more profound contentment, built on self-respect and the quiet triumph of having reclaimed my life. I raised my glass, the clink of crystal echoing softly in the room. To lessons learned, I said, my voice rich with experience, and to new beginnings. The faces around me smiled, their warmth a tangible comfort. My heart, once shattered, felt whole again, not untouched by scars, but stronger for having borne them. The quiet life I once led was gone, replaced by one far richer, far more authentically my own.